Greetings, everyone, to this Tantra Talks podcast. I'm James Gopala, your host, and the intention of this podcast is to discuss the concept of Tantra, to shed light on this term we use for a spiritual path, Tantra. And there's a lot of misconception and confusion about Tantra. So really, my goal is to bring different practitioners of the Tantric path onto the show, and so we can discuss Tantra and what it means for them individually and the practices involved. So I'm very honored to welcome my good friend Paul Diamond onto the show. Welcome, Paul. How are you doing?
Hi, James. Good. Well, thank you.
Good, good. So Paul has got quite a list of credentials. So he's been on the spiritual path now for a good 30 years and is a trained Kundalini yoga teacher, Tai Chi teacher, massage therapist, teaching Thai massage, acupuncturist, Qigong healer, and has degrees in Chinese medicine and has a master's in mysticism and religious experience from Canterbury in the UK. He's a tantric practitioner, has founded the school of Tantraya, is a mystical school in Peru, and is initiated into the Ayahuasca traditions of Peru by both a British teacher and a Peruvian teacher. So Paul, that is quite a list of accolades. So how would you describe yourself in a nutshell in terms of who you are as a practitioner and your goal as a teacher, spiritual teacher?
Gosh. I don't know about in a nutshell, but I've been kind of exploring these areas for really the whole of my life. From my very earliest memories, my main interests were in the world of magic and mysticism and the world of spirits and ghosts and all of that kind of stuff. And it never really stopped. It kind of increased, and as I got older, I began to take my interest in those things more seriously and began to practice and began to look for teachers and kind of just really involved myself in that world as much as possible, looking for direct experience. I really wanted to know the truths of mysteries for myself, and really with the intention ultimately of going on to teach them. And I would say that's pretty much the path that I led as a seeker. And then of someone who kind of found some kind of stability within themselves and, went on to kind of teach the practices and things that they've been studying themselves.
Fantastic. And right now you're in Peru, so hopefully the internet connection will keep up. And this is where your school is based, the Tantraya School, which is phenomenal. So just tell the story briefly about how we met. It was back in 2007 in India, and I'd just gone through a major spiritual awakening in Rishikesh. And it's probably a week or two, and I had some initiations and experiences. And I just remember one morning just waking up and saying to the universe, universe, please bless me with an experience or with a teaching, or gift me with something. And that morning, after setting that intention for breakfast, we met. And you introduced me to the concept of shamanism. And we did a journey. I remember we went to find the power animal, which was really powerful. We did a Kali Puja. Again, that was kind of really, I'd seen Puja, the ceremony, the rituals of the Indian tradition, but to actually do a Puja was really powerful as well, working with Kali, who's very much a Tantric deity. Also, you introduced me to the concept of 2012 and the Ascension process. All of this was new to me at the time. I'd just kind of gone from a little bit of background in Indian philosophy and Buddhism, but I hadn't gone into this whole Ascension idea of Ascension. So it seems that 2020 is a major milestone on this process of ascension that we are undoubtedly going through as a species on the planet. And I'm sure you've been asked this many times this year. How do you perceive the times that we're in right now with what's happened so far in the first half of this year? Do you see this as being a big shift on that process of ascension? And what do you perceive ascension to be?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, my views have changed on the subject somewhat since the letdown of 2012. I do feel that, again, there were forces that were kind of put into play, or were perhaps already in play, that are still playing themselves out, on the subtle levels of things. So I don't kind of dismiss the whole subject entirely. But I think that actually really we've got to kind of move away somewhat from the idea of any kind of savior mechanism or being or power of any kind, and really do the work of transforming the planet ourselves. If there's going to be any kind of ascension, we need to do it. We've got to do the spiritual work ourselves. We've got to do the physical work ourselves. We can't rely on it being some kind of astrological event or anything guided from higher forces. It may be that way, but I think we can't really rely on it. We need to kind of get on with it.
The aliens aren't going to come down and save us just yet. It's like we have to do it ourselves.
I mean, they haven't so far.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think so. It seems to be a more kind of sensible and prosaic kind of way of dealing with it. If we want it to happen, which we clearly do, well, I think that it's within our power to do that. So
there seems to be a very powerful awakening going on, that people who may have not been aware of things like the conspiracy theories and all these different things going on behind the scenes, things are coming out into the open, especially with the Epstein case and the recent arrests. And there seems to be a lot more arrests, and there's this becoming more and more apparent. There's this dark force on the planet. It seems that is beginning to lose its grip and its power, and that the beings of light, in which there are many on the planet right now, many teachers, the elders, the ones that we've been waiting for, the light beings, are starting to really, it's that snowball effect, or the 100th monkey effect, or that tipping point where the structure of the past is really starting to crumble. Is that how you kind of see this in coming years?
Yeah, I definitely, I definitely do see that. I mean, it's very easy to see that obviously the world has changed dramatically in a number of very, very profound ways in these early months of 2020. And there's no doubt that whatever repercussions there are from that are going to take quite a long time to play out. And they could indeed be the thing that we've kind of been waiting for, the golden age of the kind of the Kali Yuga. Some pandits suggest that there's a mini golden age there kind of at the beginning of the Kali Yuga, or, roughly where we are now anyway. And, I think that, again, we can do that. We can bring that about. And, I think that there are forces supporting that. And obviously, that the people are ready. And it seems like people are really ready for major change. It depends how much we're really ready to sacrifice for that change. I think a lot of people are not really ready to give up the kind of the home comforts or the easy lifestyle of the 20th and 21st century. It's not necessarily going to be an easy thing for people to give up. It's not everyone is orientated towards the spiritual. Unfortunately, we may be forced to, go there kicking and screaming, perhaps. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, it seems that it has been very challenging for a lot of people. And I guess we're all going through our own process individually, and a lot of shadow is coming up and put in a challenging situation this year. But again, it's a cleansing or a process of, ascension being just simply an expansion of consciousness in that sense, that happening collectively. Yeah, it's such a fascinating time. So you mentioned also the yugas, which is worth kind of mentioning and going over a little bit for the listeners who are not familiar with the yugas. Could you very briefly give a general outline of what the yugas are and what Kali Yuga is?
I mean, the Tantric and Hindu cultures of India and those sort of regions have a very kind of broad view of the nature of time. And, we have a pretty eschatological view of time in the West, where time has a sort of certain beginning and an apocalyptic end. But, not every culture has that same view, of course. And, in India and Bhutan and Nepal and places like this, of course, time is considered, and in shamanic view generally, time is considered to be circular or spiral or spherical even in some cases. So it doesn't really have a beginning or an end. And in the Hindu culture particularly, you know, they talk about the yugas as being very, very long periods of time, but actually get gradually shorter as you go through the various yugas. And it's considered to be go through from ages of purity to ages of corruption and decay, which is considered to be by some pandits, some scholars, the age which we are in now. Some scholars say we're not there yet. Some scholars even say that we're coming out of the Kali Yuga. So it does depend who you kind of speak to, but most scholars say we are in the age of the bad throw. The terms for yugas come from the bass playing games of ancient India, and this is the age of the bad throw. And the Kali Yuga is not actually Kali the goddess there. We're talking, it has something to do with Kali as her nature as time, but it's a different meaning in fact, and it's just talking about the age of decay.
Because I know Sri Yukteswar, the guru of Yogananda, he did a lot of work with this and relating to the precession of the equinox. And I think the Kali Yuga is a more broad term for an age, but within that you have smaller ages. And according to him, we are on that ascension, we're on that upward curve, but we've still got, I think we're in the Bronze Age, and we still have a couple more ages to go into the Golden Age, but we are on that upward curve, and things are certainly going in the right direction. And, you know, I guess, you look at how the planet has changed, certainly over the last 100 years, last millennium, last couple of millennium, it seems that hopefully, you know, there's a general upward curve in terms of advancement of technology and knowledge and things like that. I'm also very interested in, sorry, did you want to add something there, Paul?
No, it's okay, James, go on.
Cool. I'm very interested in your background, that you've been initiated into yogic traditions, tantric traditions, Taoist traditions, Sufi traditions. You obviously, similar to myself, you see the wisdom in different traditions and wanting to put them all together. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey in terms of how you've developed your knowledge and the way how you've arrived to the place that you are now, and what your general attitude is to these different traditions, and if you see them as there's commonality between them as all are very unique and different. I'm very interested in that process. Yeah,
I've taken a very eclectic path in my spirituality, not through any deliberate intent necessarily. I just was so eager and so keen to explore this realm that the names of the deities or of the traditions or whatever didn't really stop me, as it were. I never really fell into those sort of cultural biases that many people carry towards other people's traditions. I really wanted to know what was going on, but I wasn't really interested in the exoteric traditions. The kind of the outward manifestation of the religions, for example, didn't really interest me at all. I never went and explored Islam or Christianity or any of the mainstream traditions, but I was extremely interested in the mystical side of the outward religions, you know, the inner work that they were doing and the potential experiences that could be engendered via the various practices that various schools were applying. And I didn't really have any kind of major aim or intention, you know, in the beginning when I was doing this exploration. And, you know, I wasn't intending to kind of put it all together in my own mind anyway, particularly. I just wanted to kind of explore each of them and see if I could kind of get something from them that was valuable and meaningful. And if I thought I was going to find something really strong there, then I would stay with whatever it was for a long time until I could find, you know, whatever it was and, you know, get something very substantial from that. So over the years, I, you know, as you say, I've explored those things that you mentioned, as well as various other things. I've explored shamanism to a considerable degree, went around the world working with different shamanic traditions and things of this nature as well, and had kind of all of the different angles. You know, I had the kind of Western academic kind of upbringing, and was okay at Western academia. I was quite bright and did okay at that kind of thing as well. So I had a kind of a Western mind, as it were. And then I had a magical background. I was super interested in magic and magical training as a young lad, and carried on my kind of interest in that all the way through my life, in fact. And then turned over to the kind of more mystical side of it, which perhaps I could have said was my Eastern phase, you know, and getting into the kind of the yogic paths and the tantric paths. And kind of hadn't really got that interested in the shamanic stuff until some years later. So then kind of had that side of it as well. So I felt that there was something kind of there where I was able to kind of bring all of that together, the kind of the Western mind, the Eastern mysticism, the Western psycho-magical tradition, with the kind of the shamanic kind of nature-based direct working with spirits and powers and energies of the land, into something kind of not exactly new. You know, I wasn't looking to create a new system necessarily, but I was definitely able to integrate all of that within myself into a workable system for other people, where they can gain benefit from my mistakes and, you know, all of the years of that I wasted in various things, as well as the, you know, the positive stuff that I encountered as well. So yeah, I mean, you know, that kind of deal, I guess.
Fantastic. I mean, I guess you're developing your own mystery school in a sense.
Well, I've done that now. You know, this is where it's come to now. You know, up till recently, I've just been focusing on my work as a teacher and as a shaman with my own retreat center, and I've been running retreats for the past kind of, you know, 8 years or so. You know, every month doing either 1 or 2 retreats for quite a number of people, and focusing on just teaching and doing my classes and things. But now I've started to create the mystery school idea, which is to try and formularize and categorize and put everything in some kind of order, where people can have a kind of a step-by-step approach to training in evolution. You know, it's difficult to put a name to what it all is in the end. You know, when you begin to see the various strains and aspects of it, and the similarities, the commonalities, and the differences and things, then you can begin to try and find a kind of a path through all of that. And I feel I've been able to do that in a way where now I can kind of offer something useful for people.
That's great. I mean, studying all those different traditions, and they all have their own unique flavors and a language and practices, but there's a underlying unity or commonality between them. That's mystical thread. What do you think that is? I mean, it's quite a deep question, and you could spend a long time talking about it, but how would you summarize the commonality that all these traditions have? What is it?
Yeah, I think that, you know, ultimately it's what Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy. You know, that's the sort of the common root of all of the traditions, etc. And I would say actually that it's probably only now, in terms of the historical process, that actually we can give a very, very clear, succinct definition of what that is. And I would say that what it is consciousness. It's the study of consciousness in its broadest form, where consciousness encompasses any conception of divinity that you may hold. You know, that consciousness is the divinity that is being worshipped in all of the traditions. You know, the mask comes off, and that's what's lying behind that, is consciousness itself.
That's beautiful. It's perfect. I mean, in the tantric traditions of India, certainly the non-dualistic traditions, Kashmir Shaivism, Shiva is pure consciousness, and that is the foundation of reality. That is the nature of existence. And therefore, everything is mind stuff, or divine mind, God mind, purely subjective reality. And when we start to grasp that everything is just mind, and that we're just walking around in a great mind, in our own mind, yet the substratum of our own mind, from which our own mind appears in, that this is just a dream, it's really quite a significant marker stone on someone's journey. And absolutely. I think when we met, I just had that realization, and it was massive. It was major. I'd read it, and I'd understood it. And for a few days, just walking around in a waking samadhi, seeing that everything was unified and everything was just consciousness. So this is a big teaching of Tantra. And the way I interpret Tantra is that Tantra is essentially any mystical practice that works with energy, though you may have your own definition. How would you define Tantra? What does Tantra mean to you in terms of a definition?
Well, I wouldn't limit Tantra to your definition, but I would actually definitely agree with you. And it's definitely the kind of the model that I've adopted in my own kind of work is, you know, I call my school Tantraya. One of our main teachings is Qigong, for example. Now, Qigong has never been considered tantric by anybody's consideration except my own. But I fully consider it tantric for the very reason, yeah, it works with primal energy. And as you say, that's the equation in Tantra. It's consciousness plus energy equals reality, equals ultimate reality. So we're working with in that way in my own school. So I would say that any school that works with energy is a tantric school to some degree or another. Any school that's working with divine goddess energies, in particular the feminine aspect of divinity, is going to be considered a tantric school, and we certainly do that in my school. We're working with Kali as our main kind of object of worship, or the goddess that we primarily work with from a shamanic perspective. You know, again, that isn't often considered to be shamanic, but you know, up in the Himalayas, is not a very clear definition either. I think Tantra is a very difficult thing to nail down precisely. I think we can say very clearly it's anything that works with the goddess, a stream of energy, anything that works with primal energy, you know, in its raw forms as Kundalini, as the dragon power, as Chi or Prana. And I would say that anything that has a kind of holistic overview of the human condition, in some senses can be considered tantric, in the sense that Tantra is very broad and can be applied to really every aspect of a human being's life. So the Taoist schools, for example, are very tantric. They're very interested in every level of the human being. They're interested in making the body really strong, so they have the martial arts and things like that. They're interested in making the energy very, very strong, so they have the Qigong type practices. You know, the mind, and, you know, every aspect, all the way up to the karmic bodies and the very deep, you know, inner bodies. So every level of practice is covered. And I would say that as any tantric school wants to be able to do that as well. It wants to be able to apply practice to every level of a person's being until they're able to divinize or recognize the divinity of every aspect of their lives, you know, to bring awareness to the divinity of every aspect of their life.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize there are different traditions that use Tantra in a formal sense. You have obviously the Hindu traditions, the Jain traditions, you have the Buddhist traditions, the Taoist traditions. They all use what we commonly know as Tantra. But as you say, things like, you know, Qigong, which again, it does come from the Taoist tradition, but anything that really works with energy and all those things you've just described, arguably could be considered as tantric. And that brings us on to shamanism. Now, when I think of shamanism, the Vedic culture of India, the ancient tradition, was shamanic. They were worshipping and working with the elements. They were taking soma, which was like their hallucinogen, which was helping them connect to the gods. And from that tradition, that very shamanic tradition, came the Vedic culture that we know today, which is a little bit more traditional, a bit more ascetic based. It's a little bit stricter, and, you know, more of an exoteric tradition where they follow certain rules and procedures and texts and things. And obviously still that mystical side is there. And it's interesting to say, well, is that a tantric tradition? Is it a shamanic tradition? Obviously, the work that you're doing in Peru, working with ayahuasca, that is traditionally what we understand as shamanic. How do you see the commonality between the shamanic tradition and the tantric tradition? Do you see them as being the same thing, or just two separate practices with a lot of commonality, or two completely different traditions?
Yeah, yeah, it's a very interesting subject. I think that they are both a lot closer in some cases than is generally understood, you know, the unity of Tantra and Shamanism. And I think in some cases they are, in fact, very, very far apart, depending on the practices and the beings, etc., that either tantric practitioners or shamans are working with. It depends on that, I would say. So I would say that, you know, the shaman is able to connect to kind of different levels of reality. And it kind of depends where they're connecting to, is who is going to become their kind of spiritual allies on the kind of the other side of the fence, as it were. You know, you want to have allies in the shamanic tradition. You do the work somewhat yourself, but generally speaking, you're bringing spirits and things through you to do the work. And generally speaking, a shaman's going to kind of tune in their rodeo dial to whatever they're kind of able to tune into, at whatever depth they're able to tune into. So most shamans are working with localized spirits, mountain spirits, tree spirits, animal spirits in the localized environment. And that's the work they're doing. Therefore, it's considered to be kind of more, you know, perhaps animistic on one level, shamanic, definitely, but kind of stops at that level. With my own experiences, the moment I started to work with entheogenic medicines and to go deeply into the kind of the shamanic world, what I found there was what the people of the 1960s and 1970s found when they began to drop acid and things and psilocybin in large numbers, which was the Hindu gods and the Buddhist deities and bodhisattvas and that whole kind of Eastern trip. Now, I certainly wasn't raised in any of those traditions, but nor were most of the North Americans who encountered the same psychic material when they began to do those things in the 1960s. So I would say that the energies that of the tantric deities, who being Kali, Shiva, Ganesha, on the Buddhist side, you know, the bodhisattvas and you know, deities of the Buddhist pantheon, they just happen to be there at the deep psyche. And because I have this psychic model of the shamanic and magical universe, also a psychic model of the physical universe, in the sense that it is in fact nothing but mind, nothing but consciousness, I say that what a shaman is doing, what a tantrika is doing, what any magical practitioner is doing, is going to the various depths and levels of the human psyche, and they're encountering these vast powers who are entirely subjective on one level, but are still able to provide power, wisdom, energy, advice, etc., by dint of being at least autonomous within the subjective psyche. This is the nature of the game. You know, a tantric practitioner is making contact with the tantric deities in the same way the shamanic practitioner is making contact with the tantric shamanic deities, by moving inwards, not by, you know, necessarily traveling into other worlds which are outside of oneself, but through the recognition that the layers of the shamanic universe, the layers of the magical and tantric universe, lie within the depths of the human psyche. Most humans, in fact, every human, whether you're able to go there or not, it depends on kind of skill and, you know, power and things of that nature. But this is the construct of the human mind that we're talking about at the deepest levels. You know, I'm not being reductionist when I say this, because I say that every level of reality, no matter what it is the human mind, is consciousness itself and none other. So understood in this way, I don't really see a very great difference. But of course, methodologies, technologies of practice can vary enormously, and just kind of depends who you are able to tune into, I would say.
Amazing. What an amazing definition, description of the two traditions and the commonality. And of course, we have this unifying source consciousness, but then within that, we have, as you said, the different autonomous divine consciousnesses, the deities, the archetypes, which the two traditions unbeknowingly are connecting to, and they're essentially the same. Maybe they are depicted slightly differently, different names, but there's generally this concept of, you know, this divine feminine, this mother energy, and she can take various forms, maybe the loving mother, but also the destructive mother, likewise with the divine father. And so I guess both traditions are connecting to those energies. You mentioned the divine feminine being a very important part of Tantra. It'd be very helpful to go into that in a bit more depth, because of course in the more recent traditions, certainly the Judeo-Christian traditions, it's all about God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or Mary Magdalene the whore, or, you know, at least Catholicism at least recognizes Mary as the mother of God. But the divine feminine has been butchered and bastardized and cut out of certainly modern religion. And the wonder of the Eastern tradition, especially the Hindu tradition, is that it's maintained that concept of the divine feminine, not just the Hindu tradition, of course, but also the Buddhist tradition, and these other shamanic and tantric traditions, whether it's connecting to Mother Earth, Gaia, the water, the mountain. You mentioned a particular deity, Kali, and that is a focus of your devotion and your practice. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about this divine feminine energy, the Shakti energy in general, how it manifests on a universal level, but maybe also on an individual level, and a little bit more about Kali, who she is as a manifestation of that divine feminine.
Yeah. I mean, this is really powerful stuff. This is really the crux of great mystery, I would say. Actually, of course, it was there in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Of course, we had this Shekinah within the Judaic tradition, which was considered to be the kind of feminine aspect of God, and of course, within the early Gnostic Christian cultures, the Hagia Sophia, the Sophic energy, and these sort of primal wisdom goddesses. But yeah, it's considered that in the Paleolithic age and in earlier ages that there was a worldwide goddess worshipping matriarchal culture. It's not entirely given academic credence by many scholars, but some recognize that's highly probable or likely. In fact, a great deal of statuette and imagery and things of that nature show that's probable. The Venus statue, for example, and things of this nature. But I think in ourself, when it comes to this is really magical and mysterious stuff, because actually somehow it's true to say we are the goddess, and it's true to say that the universe that we perceive through our senses, whether they're our interior senses or whether they're our exterior senses, is none other than the goddess herself. Now, of course, this is very, very difficult to understand from a relative perspective. When we're talking about it from a normal human consciousness perspective, we have no understanding whatsoever that we may be that. But really, the full fruition of Kundalini awakening is the very, very clear recognition that we are the goddess, that you are the goddess. And she comes up, of course, as a cobra goddess initially, but that's just kind of one of her many faces. But we really kind of understand from an experiential, phenomenological, personal level that we ourselves are none other than that in the full fruition of our own consciousness. It's that union of Shakti and Shiva. The Shakti is considered to be lying in the Svadhisthana chakra in the form of the Kundalini serpent, but again, that's just the face. And then as she travels up the spine with clean nadis and activated chakras, etc., makes her way to the Shiva consciousness at the crown. It's an explosion of intuitive awareness and an explosion of understanding about the nature of self, the nature of reality. And it is a union of the feminine aspect, which was completely denied, completely oppressed and repressed for tens of thousands of years, actually, not just within the last 2000 or so, but actually for a very long time, the feminine aspect has been denied. And it's gone so deep within ourselves that we've completely lost touch with that, whether we're male or female or whatever gender we ascribe to ourselves. We've all lost touch with that, because when we really make contact with that feminine aspect of ourselves once again, it's something completely new. It's a new way of experiencing, seeing and knowing the world. Where on one level, the two hemispheres of the brain come together really for the first time across the corpus callosum, the nerve network, separating the hemispheres of the brain, but also in terms of like a recalling or bringing forth of all of our magical and mystical kind of abilities and capabilities that were lost, you know, all of the psychic powers and all of that kind of thing, all of a sudden can, not always actually, but, you know, can certainly manifest in this kind of unification and in this kind of awakening. And this primal recognition is, yeah, we, I, you are the goddess herself. And God is something kind of a little bit beyond, in a sense. You know, God doesn't have any material base whatsoever. The goddess has material base. She is the material, in fact. So it can be witnessed and experienced. The Godhead itself can't ever really be experienced, can only ever really be known. And it's known via the, you know, the sort of physicalization of the goddess who you are and you become.
Wow, excellent. That's phenomenal. And talking about Kundalini as well, and how it's an interesting process, because I know the Kundalini yogis would say that Kundalini is the spinal fluid. But of course, Kundalini is far more than that, but it must be somewhat intermixed with the physical component of the body. So, and also another interesting point you mentioned, it starts at Svadhisthana, whereas most people would say, oh, it starts Muladhara, the root chakra. And again, I guess it depends. It's a very similar location of the body. Either way, there's no doubt that it's the sexual energy, and it's a sublimation of the sexual energy that moves up the spine. And in terms of the actual physical alchemy that happens with the spinal fluid or whatever it might be, it does seem that it's this sublimation and this transmutation of of sexual energy into the ojas, the spiritual energy. How would you define Kundalini, you know, in terms, and trying to bring in, because I always like to bring in the physical component of the body into what is quite an abstract concept, the serpentine force that lives, you know, in Svadhisthana chakra. How do you understand Kundalini yoga? Kundalini as an energy and a physicality.
I think it's an interesting question and a good subject. You know, I think that there's always a physiological, biological, chemical, and neurological component to any real spiritual awakening on any level. There's always something that kind of knocks down to the lower levels, as it were, and there's always something that kind of knocks up to the kind of the higher levels also, you know, into sort of organs of perception that are developing on higher planes of existence, for example, and on the lower levels, definitely through the physicality of the body. There's, of course, a very interesting book called, I don't remember who wrote it, but it's called The Biology of Kundalini. It's a very interesting book. It's quite big and fat. So actually, it's a very long subject with lots of physiological correlates that we could spend quite a long time going into, that have been studied from somewhat scientific, double-blind, placebo-based Western studies, etc. So there's definitely a biological component that can be, you know, analysed and mapped and looked at in some way. And there is a feeding, I would say, or a firing of the Kundalini energy via the sexual fluids. However, they're not the same thing, and they're not automatically connected with one another. Kundalini can fire off even if you've just had sex, even if you've released all of the ojas and the seminal fluids, etc. You can still have a Kundalini awakening, because it's orientated from something higher. You know, it's a kind of a grace-given thing ultimately. So it doesn't have to be anything to do with the physiology or biology at a kind of a fundamental level. That is something that we can use on a kind of a material level to manipulate the Kundalini, to awaken Kundalini. You know, we can kind of do that, but it isn't always kind of so bound up together that we can say that they're one and the same thing. No, by no means. You know, the Kundalini goddess, the Shakti energy, is not defined solely by, you know, her interaction with the seminal fluid in men. It's not that simple.
All the vaginal fluids for women, menstrual fluids.
Exactly, yeah. It's way beyond that in its sort of full flourishing or manifestation, to say that it's, could be kind of, it's not to say there's not enormous power in sexual fluids. Of course, there's enormous power there. You can awaken incredible things inside the brain, and including Kundalini, but they're sort of like, can be separated as well in this discussion, definitely. And in experience, of course.
You brought up some really interesting points there. First one I wanted to touch on is this idea. Hold on, I lost my train of thought. It's such an important subject for me, because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the years. This concept of Kundalini. It definitely is an act of grace, that there maybe there's a set time that you have this awakening. The teacher, John Villon Melchizedek, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, he talks about the 3 different types of Kundalini awakening. He says one is the sexual orgasm. The second one occurs where you have this more like this energetic shooting up of the spine, this energy, this blissful, paralyzing experience. And when that happens, and that's probably more grace-based, based on past karma, spirituality becomes the most important thing in your life. You're not enlightened, you're not awakened, but it means that you are firmly and fully committed to the path of spirituality. The third being what we'd understand as enlightenment, where there is an alignment with your macabre and your spiritual energy, and that once that happens, you move into the heart and you're in that state of enlightenment. Now, again, it's an interesting theory. I certainly can relate to the first 2, but awakening Kundalini is a big focus of Tantra, a big focus of the Tantric practices, especially Hatha Yoga. The idea is that the Kundalini is the divine feminine. She resides in these base chakras, and the divine masculine, Shiva, is at the crown, again, male and female. And then we have this divine union when the Kundalini rises through the spiritual practices, through grace, through whatever it is, and rises, and you have this divine union at the crown, and then this unity at the heart, because of course the heart is unified in its consciousness, where we have that separation of the brain and the 2 hemispheres. What do you think? Do you have any comments on just some of those things that I've just brought up there?
Yeah, I think that's somewhat of the process, exactly. I mean, I think it's a very multifaceted phenomenon. I think the epiphenomenology of Kundalini experience is actually very broad, ranging from hearing voices and seeing ghosts all the way up to, kind of liberated states of consciousness. And a lot of it is pranic manifestations, certain energy forces moving into and through the spinal channels, which are particularly involved with Kundalini awakening, although they're not the only channels that major forces can work through, because Kundalini is not the only force that can be awakened within the body in this manner. The other force that can be awakened in this manner is the dragon force. The dragon force is more akin to the kind of the Taoist practices and the Qigong stuff, and that resides actually more in the central channel, the Chongmai, the central thrusting channel. So actually these are the 2 real major forces that can be awakened through spiritual practice, that are, kind of completely transformative in their full flourishing and manifestation. They completely transform you into a new type of human being, or a new being, as it were, or even perhaps an old being that we once were, or something like this, but definitely a new way of experiencing and being in the world, let's say. So but otherwise, yeah, that kind of basic map, let's say, that is provided by the yogic tradition of moving up through the chakra system, can be experienced in Kundalini awakening, may not be experienced in Kundalini awakening. There may be no experience of chakras whatsoever. So I think a lot of it actually has become very kind of fixed in people's minds of how it's supposed to look, particularly, which is going to be a mistake when it comes to this multifaceted phenomenon, to try and kind of nail it down to one model only. But definitely, yeah, there's definitely a kind of a moving up the spine, kind of explosive kind of stuff, awakening of kind of hidden portions of the brain, and unlocking certain kind of secret powers, and all that kind of stuff. And then really we want the energy ultimately, if it's a balanced awakening, to come down and settle into the heart space rather than staying up around the crown, or moving into some kind of transcendent reality which is beyond the physical. I'm very averse to this in my teaching and my work. I think it's very important that we are here now doing the work, not trying to get off planet or ascend or escape or do any of those things, but actually get down to being super physical, changing life here for all of us. And that the only way to do that is by acting on the energy when it comes down into the heart, because up in the head spaces, you're kind of a bit trippy. The most part.
Yeah, so it's like balancing of the more conceptual chakras and more the instinctual chakras, and the heart being the central chakra. And exactly. Where, again, in all the traditions, certainly the Hindu traditions, the Tantric and the Vedic traditions, it refers to the heart as being the seat of the soul, and where we have the sacred space. Even in the Western traditions like Christianity, the sacred space of the heart is that it seems to be the journey that we're all on. They have this awakening to lead us into the heart center. Certainly something that I feel is very important. We're moving back to this heart-based living. I'd love to know more about this dragon energy. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Is that more working with the Dantian and Manipura chakra, the third chakra, which of course is the fire chakra, the warrior chakra, the chakra of power?
Yes, it definitely has something to do with the Dantians. The Dantians are considered to be energetically different from the chakras. They're considered to be more inclusive structures than the chakras, i.e. a Dantian contains more chakras than just the singular chakra. There's like 2 or 3 chakras per Dantian, especially in the lower Dantian. The lower Dantian is considered to be actually below the belly button, so it's a little bit not in the Manipura area, but some schools include the solar plexus area in the lower Dantian work. But the dragon energy, yeah, it's to do with the activation of the Dantians, it's to do with the activation of the Tongmai channel. These are the deep psychic channels called the extraordinary meridians, or deep psychic pathways of the body. And these are the channels that the kind of very fundamental energies of heaven and earth and yin and yang kind of flow through in the body, the very deep primal channels that haven't actually, interestingly, been very well mapped within the yogic tradition. I feel that the yogic tradition and the Ayurvedic tradition actually lost an awful lot of their information about the subtle channels of the body, and tended to focus on, yes, there were 72,000 nadis, but we're only interested in 3 of them. The Chinese tended to be interested in, at least a few more than 3, and mapped actually some psychic channels and things that the yogic tradition weren't that interested in or didn't know about. And that's where the dragon force resides. The yogic tradition never really kind of described that side of it, but the Taoist tradition, the Qigong and internal martial art traditions kind of explored that to some degree, depending on the level of the school. And this is another force that can be awakened. Again, it kind of comes up in a way, and we feel a great kind of transformation on a subtle energy body level, but also to a certain degree on a physiological level. This is kind of shape-shifting, or turning into a being of power who shares your consciousness or your space, as it were. Difficult, conceptualize in some way.
Would that always be a dragon, or could it be any animal?
No, it's definitely a dragon.
Wow. That's awesome.
Christians were trying to slay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we don't want people becoming empowered, of course, because then they wouldn't be controllable. Fascinating.
Hence, the serpent and the dragon have always been maligned.
Dragon energy. Another teacher that I follow, Andrew Bartzis, the galactic historian, he talks about the dragon energy. He refers to Bruce Lee and Jimi Hendrix as actually being dragons manifested. He says we all have a personal dragon, and when at least one, and when we're ready, we connect to that dragon energy. And so for me, having connected to my personal dragon, the dragon symbology and the energy is very, very important. Though I maybe don't have that full encompassing understanding of exactly what that dragon energy is. Now you've talked about it. I can imagine on a personal level, it's feeling empowered and confident and strong and having that warrior spirit. How do you perceive the beings that are dragons? Because obviously we've had the references to dragons in our culture since the beginning. What is the dragon energy? And I mean, and again, what part of is the dragon energy playing on the planet right now, would you say?
Yeah, it's an extremely powerful force that again, yeah, kind of has penetrated into the psyche to consider so powerful. I mean, you see manifestations of kind of Kundalini stuff kind of all over the planet. You see manifestations of dragon stuff all over the planet as well. You know, this is really kind of burst through the kind of the veil that has occluded human consciousness for such a long time. There's certain forces that are powerful enough to kind of break through and to make themselves known, and the dragon force is one of them. Because it works really at many different levels, actually. You know, there are various, sizes, shapes, and levels of power of draconian beings, right up to the level of our universe being a giant dragon. You know, from a mystical and magical perspective, that's one understanding. Is they go all the way up to kind of planetary forces. They go all the way up to kind of spiral galaxy forces. They go all the way up to actually the universe itself being a dragon. In its not exactly in its shape, but in its kind of energy construct. The dragon, the energy of dragons is really the energy of change and transformation. This is, and of course we're seeing that an awful lot on the planet at the moment. We kind of want the dragon force to wake up so that we can kind of get on with it. It may have a period of destruction. That's part of the nature of nature. It destroys and burns things down in order to recreate, and so do dragon forces. That's part of the nature of things. The old structures that have inhibited human consciousness for however long need to be wiped and we need to kind of reboot humanity, as it were, and the dragon forces are here to do just that.
Absolutely, that's awesome. The teacher, again, that I mentioned, he describes the dragons as being the most powerful elemental force there is, pretty much. That they're the guardians and the facilitators of change and transformation, as you mentioned. On an individual level, then, when you're working with this dragon energy, I think we may have already touched on it, but some of the qualities that you may start to experience when you really truly awaken your dragon energy, what kind of qualities may you experience and start to manifest?
Yeah, gosh, it depends at what level you're working at it with. Definitely within the work of my teacher and within my own work and the work that we both do with the medicines, with the entheogens, along with the magical and shamanic practices, we're able to take people to the level where they're experiencing, a physiological energetic and spiritual transformation into this spiritual being that they always were kind of residing within themselves. So it's kind of very, very radical in a kind of, a high level. But it may be communication with dragon spirits who are kind of like helping you become kind of like helper spirits and allies on a shamanic level. It may be kind of, working with them on a magical level, so asking for things, perhaps offering things in return, and doing kind of rituals and things of that nature with them. It may be working with them at a kind of like an elemental level, leaving offerings in nature and, seeing them within the kind of forms and energetic structures of the natural world, within mountains and lakes and things, and working with them kind of at that level. So I think there's many, many different kind of levels of the work. As there is in a sense with Kundalini, it's what level are you approaching it at? What level is your teacher able to, pull something through for you at? Something like this.
Cool. Again, Kundalini being the Shakti force, the divine feminine force within, as we've mentioned. And we've mentioned also the goddess Kali, and being a center point of your practice, your devotion, your current center in Peru. Who is Kali?
Yeah, who is she? Gosh. Who are any of the gods, you know? I mean, of course, we've put so much onto them. It's very difficult to say what they are. You know, I think we want to try and move away from rigid conceptualizations of these forces, moving into a more experiential relationship with them and less of an intellectual relationship. It's difficult to say what they are. It's easy to say that if you move inside deep enough, or you go into the, you know, magical universes or shamanic universes, whatever that they may be, or deep psychology or depth psychology, or, you know, transpersonal psychology, you meet these forces. And somehow or another, whether or not it's human consciousness shaping them, or whether they're adopting human, you know, mental constructs in order to not fry us when they meet us, or whatever it may be. But there's no doubt that bizarrely, when you go inside and you open the inner eye, the visionary eye, these beings and deities appear to you as they do in their gaudy Indian postcard form. They're there with their multiple arms and their multiple weapons and their, you know, kind of blue skin. And yeah, it's very bizarre. It's not, we can't explain it, and we can't explain it away, but there's no doubt they are there in the interior of the psyche, and that you can make contact with them in a way that makes, you know, change in your own life, you know, gives enormous kind of boosts of power and energy and, you know, transformation and change, or whatever it may be. But there's no doubt that you're making contact with a power, and that power is enabling some kind of manifestation of change or transformation that you yourself would not be able to bring about of your own accord.
Awesome. And Kali is known as the Dark Mother, the power of the divine feminine, which is involved in destruction and transformation, and not always, I mean, there is definitely that loving aspect to Kali, but she's often depicted as being very frightening. She's standing on Shiva. She's got the garland of skulls of the head. She's just decapitated, a tongue sticking out with the fangs dripping blood. She's a more of a terrifying force of nature. And that's how I personally perceive Kali to be raw power. Okay, we talk about Shakti, the divine feminine, as being power, and you can have the nice Lakshmi, the Mother Mary energies, the gentle, loving, nurturing mother, and of course that's one face of divine Shakti. Kali is the force that doesn't mess around, and the idea of chopping the heads off is chopping the ego off and dragging you to enlightenment, you know, with no niceties, just taking you there, kicking and screaming. So it's that incredibly powerful, it's that powerful energy of the divine feminine. I think women globally, and men in a sense, are getting back in touch with that divine power within, the feeling, the emotion, the Kali energy, coming into their power, becoming more and more empowered, connecting to the Dark Mother, the empowered woman, as well as the caring, loving, compassionate woman. Is that how you see Kali to be the archetype of the power, raw power, destructive side of the divine feminine?
No.
That's
no,
great.
She's got such a bad rap. She's got such a bad
I don't see that as being a bad thing, though. For me, that's awe-inspiring.
Obviously, you know, she has a certain presentation that can be a little bit disturbing if we're of an ignorant nature. But, you know, I'm afraid that, you know, the major conception of Kali, of course, came to us through British missionaries, or British, you know, the British, basically, in 18th, 19th century India. And of course, they couldn't understand, you know, they're coming from a monotheistic, Judeo-Christian culture, you know, they suddenly encounter a land with over, you know, 50,000 gods. And of course it appeared to them as demonetary and as devil worshipping, you know, heathens and all of that. What else could they conceptualize? And, you know, of course, when you see the skulls around her neck and the swords and all of that, it just adds to that kind of, you know, mental outlook. But that's a very Victorian way of analysing it, and a very kind of analysing. You know, the wrathful deities in all the cultures really are considered to be the most loving, because they're considered to, you know, be prepared to do whatever it takes to bring you to freedom, to liberation, to truth. You know, any being that's doing that slowly, any being that's doing that with half-heartedness or with lacklusterness or, you know, without a sense of urgency, isn't doing you any favors. You know, we need goddesses like Kali who are prepared to do whatever it takes to bring you to ultimate freedom as quickly as possible, even if you don't like it, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Well, it should, it needs to. If it's not stirring you up in some way, if it's not upsetting you or kind of, you know, disturbing you in some way, it's not really spirituality, and it's not really doing its job. You know, real spirituality is cutting through illusion. And I'm afraid we are, you know, mired in illusion. We are covered in it. We've totally lost contact with who and what we truly are. So we need goddesses like Kali in our culture, in our society, in our lives, and in our species. Absolutely. She's the most loving of them all.
The most loving of them all. That's interesting. Yeah, I think, again, it's all one at the end of the day. There's the divine feminine, and working with those. I guess we can relate to different archetypes in different ways. Tell me a bit more about ayahuasca, because often ayahuasca has been, not that I've ever taken ayahuasca, and I really would love to, and I'm very interested about the work with ayahuasca. Often ayahuasca is also described as a feminine serpentine energy. How have you, tell us more about ayahuasca. How have you encountered ayahuasca? Tell us about the journeys and kind of the healing effects that can happen with ayahuasca.
Yeah, I mean, the very first time I drank, I saw the intimate and deep connection between ayahuasca, Kundalini, and Mother Kali. I saw it extremely clearly and understood intuitively that the Soma medicine of the, you know, native Indian culture and Dravidian culture was highly likely to be of the nature of ayahuasca, if not, you know, it's not the same plants, but you can pharmacologically replicate the alkaloidal elements of the medicines fairly easily across a number of different cultures, utilizing different plants. So I just kind of really understood, okay, this is what they were doing. They were utilizing Soma, it was raising Kundalini, and via the Kundalini, it was making contact with the Kali force of divine reality. You know, the Kali and Shiva force of divine reality, that this was the awakening that was experienced in ancient India that led to Vedic and yogic and tantric cultures. So I kind of saw the root of it right there and then. And there wasn't any kind of, you know, jungle happenings. I wasn't seeing leopards or pumas or you know, any of that kind of stuff. I kind of had lots of that kind of thing later on, but it was like immediately in the reality of the gods, of the Hindu gods, again, despite the fact I had no genetic or personal relationship with that culture. That is the beings that were there, and they were possessing me and working through my body, doing healing work on other people within 2 or 3 ceremonies of drinking. And that became my shamanic work, was to, you know, surrender to the deities, to allow the deities to work through me and to, you know, do the healing work and the karmic kind of freeing work that they were doing. And oftentimes I had no clue what the beings were doing through me as they were doing their business, you know. So it was very, very deep and intimate. And I see not a lot of difference. I think that entheogenic medicine, spiritual practices in general, increased prana or chi. The increase in prana or chi activates Kundalini. Kundalini activation equals movement in consciousness and through consciousness, firstly through states of consciousness, and then finally through stages of consciousness, and then finally through stabilization into the understanding of the nature of consciousness as a a whole.
And have you, I know you said you've done thousands of ayahuasca journeys, which is phenomenal. Have you had those non-dualistic, blissful experiences of pure consciousness on the ayahuasca journeys, or is it normally a bit more phenomenal and you've got these beings and deities and things like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, I would say, with the medicine. I would say that in 99% of people's cases, the journeys always start off being very phenomenological. And this is because of the nature of purification. You experience stuff because of the nature of friction in the energy channels. The energy channels are constricted. As blocked energy tries to move through the channels, it creates friction. As it creates friction, it creates phenomenon. As the channels become clearer and clearer, there's no more friction, therefore there's no more phenomenon. So less and less happens. The more and more you drink, the clearer
less
and clearer.
Purging, you mean?
Less and less happens phenomenologically. You and as a shaman doing the work as well, of course, it wouldn't be useful if you were, in the medicine. You get to a point with that as a worker with the medicine, where you can drink a great deal and just be extremely in a state of clarity. You can see what's going on an energetic perspective. You know what's happening in all these other realities. You're seeing what's happening in the individual people's journeys, but you yourself are not tripping, going into other realms or anything like that. If I wanted to talk to my mother on the telephone, I could very easily do that. If I wanted to go and do something, work on writing or something, I could go and do that, no problem. This is when you get into that kind of open-minded state with it, through working with the medicines a lot and through other practices, that are part of the program, as it were.
So in a sense, taking the medicine over the years, you've kind of purified the nadis, so you're not having all these crazy death experiences, trippy experiences, that you can be very still and centered in your own being, even after taking the medicine. And as a shaman who are helping people journey, you obviously have to be in that centered place so you can assist others. And so tell us a bit more about the whole process. So say someone comes, obviously you're in Peru, a sacred valley of Peru. Tell us a little bit about what you offer to students who want to stay at the retreat center, to Tantraya Mystic School in Peru. Tell us about what you offer as a teacher, and how someone might join, say, an ayahuasca retreat and the other things that you do there.
We're offering quite a few different things, and obviously since the pandemic, it's kind of changed in what we're offering and what we're doing. But before all of that, we were offering retreats once a month, which were 8-day retreats where you drink the ayahuasca medicine 3 times, and then we're also as part of the program doing Qigong practices and deep meditation practices, deity-based practices, pujas, and fire rituals and things like this, and that kind of provides the structure and the holding of the power of the medicine. This gives the opportunity for medicine to really go into its full manifestation, and for very, very big things for people to happen, where they're being held with the energy practices and all the other things that they're doing, and that they're able to go away and continue their own evolution via the practices that we're offering, so that they don't have to rely on the medicine, because that's a big mistake that people make. It's not a be-all and end-all. It's another tool in your toolbox, as it were, and it needs to be understood within a sphere or field of practice, and not given full attention, because it can be so exciting and interesting for people. They just kind of focus on that and don't really kind of develop necessarily in other ways. But I like to see balance in every area of a person's life, and I like to see evolution in every area of a person's life. You can't just evolve the astral senses, you need to do other things also. So we're kind of evolving all of the different subtle organs and, you know, all of that kind of work. And then when we're outside of a retreat, we're teaching classes on Magick and shamanism and Taoist practices, Qigong, doing some yoga practices and, you know, stuff like that as well. And now we've moved a lot over online. I'm offering a lot of different workshops. We've done, I think, 4 or 5 different workshops, one a month, on our Tantraya Mystic School page. And, you know, we're doing kind of lucid dreaming and astral projection and internal alchemy. And we're going to have a fairy magic one coming up, and a basis in alchemy one coming up, and a sex magic one coming up, and lots of different exciting things that I've explored over the years that I think people will be excited and interested in. And then we'll begin to put it all into order for people when we've got enough out there so that they can have a curriculum of personal development.
Sounds phenomenal. And again, with the coronavirus, a lot of things are online now. So I imagine you're accumulating, putting everything as a course potentially that people can sign up to and work through. That's awesome. Well, Paul, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been very enlightening. And again, you've got so much experience in different traditions and all the work you've done with shamanism and Tantra and yoga and Magick. It's been really phenomenal. How can people get hold of you? What's the best way if they want to learn a bit more, maybe want to visit your center and learn a bit more about what you're offering?
We have a Tantraya page on Facebook. That's a good way to connect with us. We have our Tantraya community page on Facebook, which people can join as well if they're interested in knowing when we're going to be doing stuff and things like that. And then we've got our tantraya.com website. And now we've got a Tantraya Mystery School page up. I think that's on Shopify at the moment, but we're planning on moving that over. But Tantraya Mystery School is where you're going to find a lot of the courses that we've done recently. And yeah, that's kind of it at the moment in terms of how to contact.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Paul. I really appreciate it. And yeah, please do like and subscribe to the channel, and there'll be more content, and maybe we'll have another conversation another time, because I feel there's so many more things I'd like to discuss, but obviously we only have so much time. So thank you all for watching, and thank you to Paul for joining us and sharing all your wisdom and knowledge with us.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you very much, everybody. Blessings.